was clear consensus at the meeting that we should ratify expeditiously. Of course, every country will have to operate on its own domestic timelines, but we certainly hope that each one will do so as fast as possible. But we actually had a very good meeting in this ASEAN summit. In fact, in the run-up to the summit itself, because of the Middle East crisis, the Philippines had to adjust and scale back the format. There were even some thoughts that we might do away with a physical meeting and have a virtual summit. But in the end, I'm glad we made the effort to meet one another and have a face-to-face meeting. Because you can't have the same discussions, and the quality of discussions will be very different in a virtual format. But here, the ASEAN leaders met. We had candid discussions on the nature of the conflict that we were confronting. We were focused on the challenges, and everyone agreed we had to do more to strengthen our collective resilience, and particularly to strengthen energy and food security. So it was a very fruitful meeting. We are working out these priorities, but the key issues and the key focus, I think, will revolve around quite similar themes, which is, number one, strengthening ASEAN's collective resilience, two, advancing our integration efforts, and three, advancing our community building agenda. These are broad priorities that, in a way, have been reflected in previous years' chairmanship, so they have to continue. But of course, the specific measures, the specific focus will differ from chair to chair, and we are working on what we will focus on when we take over as chair next year. We will, as I mentioned just now, the agreements are important. They are an expression of ASEAN solidarity, and certainly we want countries to ratify as soon as possible. Each country will, of course, have to do so based on their own domestic commitments and timelines. But it's not just the only thing we will focus on during our chairmanship. There were also new ideas discussed, for example, during this meeting, which we hope can continue in the next summit and perhaps even when we take over as chair. For example, countries talked about, or we had discussions, and the ministers and officials have been discussing ideas around regional fuel stockpile. It's a very early stage. We already have a stockpile for rice under ASEAN +3. So the question is, would we be able to do something similar for energy, be it within ASEAN or with external partners? So it's an idea that was discussed briefly amongst the leaders, but it's not been fully fleshed out. I think the ministers will need to discuss further. And if it's something that is worth pursuing further and there's interest, then perhaps it will continue. The discussions will continue at the next summit and perhaps even within Singapore's chairmanship. So these are things we will continue to pursue as chair. Whether it's ATIGA or APSA, which is the Petroleum Security Agreement, these are all arrangements that facilitate more mutual support between ASEAN member states. And these sorts of arrangements bring concrete benefits to our peoples and our businesses, because it means ASEAN comes together, we provide mutual support, we reduce our vulnerability, and we cushion the impact of any shock on our businesses and workers. So in the end, when these agreements are in place, because of the stronger supply chain resilience that we have, because of the mutual support arrangements, they will provide benefits to our people. I've mentioned just now what happened during the meeting this year. Whether it's going to be the new format, well, certainly if there is a prolonged crisis, then every country as host will have to make adjustments to the format of the meetings. But as I mentioned just now, there's still a lot of value to having a face-to-face meeting, and we saw this during this present summit. On the value of ASEAN going forward, there is tremendous value in ASEAN's in us having this ability to work together as a group, because we all know that we are in a new global environment. It's characterized by a few things, less about rules and more about power. It's less about economics and more about security. It's less about efficiency and more about resilience. And in this new environment, countries individually, especially smaller and medium-sized economies, will find it much harder to navigate these challenges. But working together as a bloc, ASEAN has a greater collective voice and has a greater ability to shape outcomes. And we are in a much better position to manage any disruptions and shocks together as a regional grouping. That was clearly articulated by all ASEAN leaders during this meeting. Everyone felt the urgency and the need to keep ASEAN strong and united and to continue advancing our efforts for ASEAN integration. And so I have no doubt that ASEAN solidarity, unity, and the role of ASEAN will become even more important in this new global environment. Myanmar's issue is complex. It's a very difficult one. Some steps have been taken. There have been recent developments, including the release of prisoners and the reduction of prison sentences, but there's still much more to be done. ASEAN has an agreed framework for this, which is the 5-point consensus, and we also agreed that we maintain that framework, but we also need to see more progress for the 5-point consensus to be fully implemented. That takes time. That also requires inclusive and constructive dialogue with all the key stakeholders in Myanmar. It cannot be imposed from anyone from outside. So we have to be patient, but at the same time, ASEAN will not be passive. We will continue to engage the Myanmar authorities. We will want to encourage them to take concrete steps forward, and we have to do it in a step-by-step manner. So we will coordinate our efforts with Philippines as chair this year, and next year when Singapore takes over as chair, we will certainly continue with these efforts too.